Yeah, thanks so much. And joining us now on This is the Day is Chris Stepien. He's the author of 3 Days, The Search for the Boy Messiah. It's a biblical novel, and we're happy to have Chris in studio with us. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Talk a little bit about your background. I know you had a background in journalism, but and then what made you decide to write this novel?
I'm a former television producer, director, a former life, and I've worked in advertising and marketing. So I've spent my whole life writing and communicating, usually with images and sound, but had to do script writing as well. And so I'm a storyteller at heart.
Yeah. And this is the first time you've written a novel?
First time I've ever written a book. I've written print materials for marketing and advertising, and even some things that are, you know, a little more inspirational than that. But I've never attempted something that was 82,000 words.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a story that I know a lot of people can relate to nowadays too, and you know, missing a child. And what made you decide to pick this one out of all the stories in the Bible?
Well, Kevin, I have to tell you that this book directly came out of my prayer life. I had some real challenges in my life about 10 years ago, including some serious health challenges. I spent a month in the hospital. And so life had brought me to my knees, literally. And being Catholic, I turned to God, and I picked up my rosary, and I turned to Mary and I said, I'm going to pray a decade of the rosary a day, and I need you to get me closer to your son. And so less was actually more, because I would focus on just one decade. I'd use the Ignatian spiritual exercises, really trying to pretend to be part of the gospel story. And I'd pray the 20 mysteries, and every 20 days I'd come around to the finding in the temple. And as a father, a husband and a father of 2 sons, it would drive me crazy, the thought of losing a son. I really started to contemplate it and feel what his parents must have felt. I mean, Hail Mary, full of grace, you lost the Messiah. I mean, the thought of that is just staggering.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, nowadays people, you know, we have the Amber Alert and everything like that, and there's more communication. But back then, you know, if you lose a child, I can't imagine what kind of resources it would take to find it in non-communication type time. Yeah.
Other than the community, you had no resources. The wealthy had some form of a messenger. They could have a paid messenger, but people usually relied on travelers. I think most parents could relate to this book, because anybody who's had a child, you have 2, will tell you that they had a moment where they didn't know exactly where their son or daughter was. And the feeling, even if you're running around a department store or a public event and they're out of sight for those 5, 10, 15 seconds, that feeling in your heart, that loss, is something anyone can relate to.
Talk about the story itself too. I know there's not a lot of information in the Bible about this particular story, but how you work that, the biblical facts, along with you know, providing some of the novel.
Well, actually, this is the only story about the youthful Jesus. It's in the 2nd chapter of Luke, verses 41 to 52, and so there isn't much there. But in those 12 verses, there's a lot. There's this rub, this tug, if you will, between Mary and her son and Joseph. Mary's upset. She finds her son and says, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been searching with great anxiety." And he says, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that I must be in my father's house?" But how did he say it? And what really went on? You know, was he ever in jeopardy during those 3 days? Who did he meet? Where did he sleep? How did they cope while they were searching? And so what I did, with the help of a good friend of mine, Father Joseph Marquis, who pointed me in the direction of some good resources, I began to really study the history and the times. This book is very much about Jesus' Hebrew experiences, sort of what kind of prayers he would have said, what his family would have said. I use his name Yeshua, which is the Hebrew name for Jesus. And actually it covers all 5 of the joyful mysteries through the course of this story. And we go to the temple for Passover. I will never imagine the Eucharist the same way after reading about how the Passover was celebrated in the ancient times. They were literally slaughtering thousands of kid goats and lambs for the Passover in one day. So that changes the whole way you look at the Paschal lamb and the body and blood of Christ. So it was a powerful learning experience for me. And then after I thought originally I'd write a screenplay, I soon discovered I can't get my arms around this. I can't make this tight enough. I'll put it in a novel. And I tried to write it very visually, describing a trip through Samaria. And I thought that was logical, although most Jews would have avoided Samaria because the Samaritans and the Jews didn't get along. But we know Jesus went to Samaria as a man later in his ministry. So I thought that would be consistent with Mary and Joseph and Jesus, and they would have gotten the caravan to go through, being less biased, more welcoming, more merciful people. So I tried to capture the culture, the food. Look at me, I like food. So we talk a lot about food in the book, and what would Jesus eat, and how the Passover was celebrated, and where he would have shopped for his breakfast or dinner during those 3 days, and then what types of people he would have met. Slave trading was common in those days. It was very common for a young child to die by the age of 14. So you'd want to talk about what Mary and Joseph were thinking about, or Miriam and Joseph. Is our son alive? Yeah. Does he belong to someone now?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I want to let people know where they can get this book and find out more and take a read at it.
Well, right now the book is available at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Walmart.com, and a few small private stores, but it's available online. Or you can visit www.theboymessiah.com and learn about the book and where you can get it.
Had a great experience writing. Anything in the future, maybe another one?
Actually, I'm thinking about a sequel. I've begun research on it. I'd like to call it 3 Days Inside a Mother's Heart. And I would like it to be, I'm thinking of the last 3 days of Mary's life. Okay. Because if you remember in the Gospel of Luke, it mentions a number of times that she kept these things in her heart, like at the presentation of the temple, for example. So I'm thinking of the last 3 days she's with John, the disciple John, and perhaps recalling a lot of things throughout her life that she'd kept in her heart.
Excellent. We'll look forward to that, too. We'll have to have you back when you do that.
Oh, I'd love to come back.
Thanks so much, Chris, for being with us. We're going to send it back to the rest of This Is the Day.